Hello, this is Fletch, and welcome to Twilight Render's video tutorial series. Today we are addressing light emitting surfaces, LEMs, emitter materials, whatever you prefer to call them. Some call them surface lights. I forget all the other terms, but here we go. Here we have a basic scene. This scene is a very simple model. This is 220 centimeters. This is 400 centimeters, so 4 meters by 2 meters 20, which would be like 12 feet long, something like that, by 9 feet high. Okay. So I've just built a simple box. I've given thickness to all my surfaces. This is just good modeling practice when you're going to render. To avoid light leaks, you want to give yourself thickness to your surfaces. So I built thick walls, and the back wall is a thick wall. The floor has a thickness. Okay. And here I've just painted the back wall with a image that I imported. So it's just a simple JPEG image that's on the back wall. And then I painted all the other surfaces with this light gray color, Gainsborough, from Colors Named. It's one of these. Yeah, this one, Gainsborough, right here. And why did I do that? Because that's 86, and that's about as white as you want to get. It's good practice when you are rendering that your whites definitely don't want to go over like a brightness of 92. But for white surfaces, I try to keep it around 90. In this case, it's just Gainsborough 86. And then the back wall, I left it out. However, the JPEG was imported. I just left that alone. So what we have here is these alternating surfaces. And on this surface, I just painted it a color. And I changed the name of that color to something else that I could find later. It doesn't matter. You don't have to change the name. You can leave it whatever color you want. I generally will pick something bright, and then I will go and edit it later on, and I'll call it an emitter, and I will desaturate it and turn it back to 100%. And then I will choose the Twilight material editor and click on that new, here it is, it's called magenta. You can see here it's called magenta. And then go to templates and find the emitter. And in this case, I just chose low voltage 50 watts. And that's because it's an LED wall panel, and that's a low voltage wall panel. And you can keep in mind that these are just a place to start. You can literally set this to any wattage. I can set it to 10,000 watts. But if you do that, you'll see that it's going to blow out. Okay. We'll go back to the basic ball and cube here. Setting. So 50 watts general. I find myself a lot of times in my scenes when I use light emitting materials, I'll start at 150 watts. I'll usually choose this preset. I'll go templates, emitter, and I'll use like incandescent 60 watts, and I'll just set this to 150 watts. That's generally kind of where I basic start out, and then I'll do some test renders to see if it needs to go up and down from there. But in this case, you can see here when you click on a material, it'll tell you what you've used in the past on that surface. And here you can see that I set it to emitter, low voltage 50 watts. So on this one, I'll go to templates, emitter, low voltage 50 watts, and that's it. And then in my environment settings, I chose background color because basically I want to turn off the sky, and I set the background color to black. So you can set your color you want here, and I chose black. And why background color and not sky color? Because background color to black means that the sky will not contribute any light or reflection or anything. And therefore it is going to make my render times a little faster because it's not calculating anything for the sky. And I've disabled the sun, so turn that off. So I only have these emitter panels lighting. And remember now, for this demonstration, I changed that one. It's still called magenta, and all these other ones are called LED emitter panels, but they both have the same template applied. And then if you're using light emitters, you want to render on Easy 09 render setting, because they will slow other render settings down. You can run a prelim real quick just to see how they're working, but since I have a decent computer here, I'll use this. I have a computer with 12 threads, and I will just keep this on a low resolution, and in the exposure settings we can set them to simple right now, 1 and 1, and I'll hit play. I'm going to pause this video now, and I'm going to fast forward a little bit so you can just see how the rendering turns out. Actually, I'm not even going to do that. Look here, it's only 10 seconds in, and you can see already that the LED emitter is working just fine. It's shining on the floor, it's filling the space with light. And then I can go to this exposure, and I could just boost the exposure up. And there you go. Set the exposure to 2, and it's beautiful. Simple, clean, no fuss, no mess. It should be pointed out that I'm using Fast Forward DENOISE add-on, and you should definitely get that if you're using Twilight. It speeds up your render times drastically. You can see that this rendering was clear very quickly within 20 seconds. And it's a small size, and it's just a prelim, but you get much faster work done using that denoiser. So let's show another example. Because a lot of times you're not going to be lighting these gigantic panels. You're just going to have a simple source light. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to choose, let's choose select all with same material. I'm going to paint that one with the same material. Select bounding edges, and I'm going to hit Control G to group them. So now those are all in a group. And I can repaint them however I want. I'm going to just paint them with the same paint that was on the walls before. So I'm going to paint all of those with that color. And if we go back, just to show what it looked like here, now there will be no lights in this scene. So the render is going to fail to run. There's no lights. Okay. Now I'm going to just put a little surface right here. Copy that down. I'm going to copy that down 6 inches or 15 centimeters. Okay. And I'm going to go to click this little house in the materials box, and it will show me what's in my scene. I'm going to choose my LED emitter panels material, and I'm going to paint that on there. And remember to keep in mind, you always want to paint the front and not the back. This blue face, you don't want to be painting that. The light will shine in the direction of the forward face. Okay, so now we're going to light that whole scene with that one little tiny emitting surface. And I'll fast forward to show you the results here. Okay, so here you can see, after only 12 seconds, you can see clearly that one little emitter surface now is way too little to light this space. And if we look at the post-processing here, it's the same post-processing as we had before. It's exposure to 2. Now I could just boost the exposure. 5, okay, that's not enough, so let's go to 20. And there we go. It's not looking too bad if I go to 30. But it seems kind of an extreme exposure to be jumping up that much. So maybe I should change my lights in this case. So if we go back to exposure of 2, I mean, fair enough, that might be too low of an exposure for that little bit of light. Let's go into the settings for that light, and we'll change this to 150 watts. And remember that this is per square meter, and in this case we have a box, a face that is 45 centimeters. I'm going to just make it 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. Now it's 1/4 of a square meter. So obviously if we were to copy that over here and copy this over here, then that would be 1 square meter. So at 1/4 of a square meter, we're getting 1/4 of this power. So let's say I've had 1,000 watts here. We would actually be getting 250 watts out of this panel here. So when I set it to 500, I'm getting 125 watts from this light. So setting it at 150, I'm getting a very low amount of light coming out of that surface. So that's how that works. This per square meter is very important. So if I choose, let's say we did want it to be 500, because that would mean that we're getting 125 watts, and 125 watts out of that surface would make more sense. So let's render again now, and you see that 125 watts lights up that space more realistically. And remember, here we're still at an exposure of 2. Okay, let's stop that, and we can go into plan view, turn off perspective, and we can take that, copy it here, copy it here, copy it there, delete that one, go back to the original scene, and now we have 4 125 watts lights. And this is why it's per square meter, because now if I've got multiple surfaces painted with that light, I'm getting the same amount of light coming from each one. But if I were to change this wattage to be the total output, now it would put out 500 watts, and it would spread that 500 watts out over the whole surface of all of these. Now in this case, it would equal the same amount, because I have 1/4 of a square meter and I've multiplied it 4 times. But if I am in a large space, a large office space with hundreds of these, it will matter significantly which one I choose, whether total output or per square meters. So if I chose total output and I had 50 of these lights in my space, I would still only have 500 watts coming out of all 50 lights combined, and that wouldn't be correct. So we would want to get used to using per square meter, because then we know exactly how much light each surface produces. It just takes a little bit of math. So now we go back to here and we will re-render. I'm going to fast forward a little bit so you can see this result. Okay, so here you can see the 4 lights now is giving us 500 watts, so 125 each. Now you've got 500 watts lighting up that space, which is great. And now I could even back off on my exposure here. What would happen if we set exposure to 1? Might look more realistic than that now. And if you have the new Filmic, here's the different version. There's what simple looks like, and here's what Filmic exposure looks like. And Filmic allows you to boost some of these mid-ranges. Look at this. You can boost just the mid-range. You could increase the highlights. You can set the mid-range back to the way it was. If you can boost the highlights too much, I'll go crazy here just for example. And feel free to play with these settings and see what happens. You'll know the default is 0.1, 0.5, and 0.85 for each of those respectively. But I find that this mid-range value is quite valuable when I'm setting the tone mapping for these renderings that I'm doing. I find that I'll boost that mid-range up to 1, maybe even 2. And if you want these lights to kind of glow, turn on just a little bit of bloom. Sharpness of bloom I find to be a little bit overpowering. So when this number is lower, that means that it's more blurry. And so if you raise this number up to maybe 0.75, I find that gives me just a little touch of glow, which can look pretty nice. Maybe even, feel free to experiment. And as you change this number, you can see down here in the render window, here I'll change it to 0.75. Watch right here, it's reprocessing the image, and then when it's done, that little up and down green arrow disappears to show you that it's done processing your settings. So maybe set this back to 0.5, set sharpness at 1, and give just a little bit of glow, a little bit of bloom effect. Now I'm going to turn it off and you can see it sharpens up. And I'll turn the bloom back on again and hear how it goes kind of glowy. It's important to understand that your lighting and your tone mapping work together, and you have to constantly go back and forth and balance these two things. This is all up to your eye as the artist. Let's give one more example here. So we're going to make a rectangle that's, let's say, 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. I'm going to make that into a group. I'm going to move it up into position here. I'm going to look down from the top, turn off perspective and find my light. I'm going to lock it into the middle here. Lock it into the middle of the space. Go back to the scene. So here's my surface. We can see that it's reversed, so I'm going to flip it to go the other way. And this time I'm going to just make a little light fixture here. So I'm going to do that, do that. Do that. Okay, so we got like a little light fixture. And then we're going to take this LED emitter panel material. I'm going to go in there and paint that. I'm going to just change the color so you can see that this surface has been painted with that emitter material, and only that surface. Okay, I'm going to change it back to pure white. And we're going to render this and see how that looks. If we go in here, we can choose our material. We're going to choose this LED emitter panels material, and we can see that I have it set to 500 watts. And I'm efficiency of 18 lumens per watt, so that's that LED efficiency. I think it is the templates, emitter, low voltage. Yeah, it's 18 lumens per watt. And then I had it set to 500 watts. So if it was set to 50 watts, which is the basic low voltage template, and let's stop this and re-render. I'm going to turn off, I'm going to go back to simple, and I'm going to turn off the bloom. I'm going to hit render. We're going to set the exposure back to 2. You can see that it doesn't appear to be lighting the scene at all. And we understand why now, and that's because, so since we have a 10 by 10 square, but the power of the emitter is per square meter, we're only getting 1/10 of whatever we put in here, because that's how much surface area we have on that light. So if I put 1,000 watts, I'm actually getting 100 watts out of this light. And since it was set to 50, we're getting 1/10 of that, which is 5. So we're getting 5 watts. This is acting like a 5-watt light. And if I were to boost the exposure on here to, say, 50, you can see that a 5-watt light might give that amount of light. You can see that definitely that it's lighting the scene. Let's put it to 100, the exposure. You can see that it's definitely lighting that scene, but it's very dim because it's only 5 watts. So now if we set this to 1,000, 1/10 of that is 100, so now we've got a 100-watt light. This is now a 100-watt light fixture. And let's say we look from the top and we move that to here. Let's put it here. Divide that by 2, so now we have 3 of them. So that's 300 watts times 2, so now we have 900 watts. And let's render that and see what happens. 900 watts in that space should be really good. And there we are. So we're looking at simple still exposure of 2 like we had with the original LED wall panels. And now that we have the correct wattage setting, we understand how these lights are working, and you can see that the lights are working okay. Now that's not using the IES yet, but the IES is given by lighting manufacturers. And it is a file that tells the render engine how to throw that light based upon the characteristics of a specific light fixture. Okay, so if you want to use an IES file, you convert to deep. Right click on emittance and choose IES Light. Replace the existing. And now we can go select our IES file. Here's a look at our guide of what these IES files will look like when we apply them. You can see how they look a lot more realistic than the basic light emitting surface. I like number 11. I like number 2. Here I'm looking on the floor under 16. There's not a lot of light hitting the floor. There is a lot of light hitting the floor under number 6. So let's choose number 6. Okay. Let's try that. Now we go back to hit render. We forgot to add the radiance. We have to add a color. Because right now it was radiating nothing. It was radiating black. So be sure to add your color. So IES light, and then it's radiating a solid color of white. Or if you choose SketchUp, it'll radiate whatever color you choose in SketchUp. Let's choose that. Let's test that out. There we are. They're radiating white. And I'm going to move them closer to the wall so you can see how they're throwing light. I converted them into components with a plugin that I use called, I think it's Group Tools or something. I don't really remember. I'll try and put a link in the description. But now I want to just push this down just a little bit so it's not so high up. There we go. Let's try again. And now you can see that throw of light down the wall. I'll pause this and fast forward a little bit so you can see the results. Now it looks to me that IES light is super powerful, so I'm going to change the exposure to 1 instead of 2. And now you can see that a lot of the detail comes back in that area. I'm even going to maybe try a little highlight compression to try and get some of the detail back in right in here. I'm going to boost this to 2 and see what happens. There we go. Now we got some detail back in here. I'm going to choose Filmic. So this is just basic simple exposure, but using a highlight compression of 2 to get some detail back in there. If we go to Filmic, set the mid-range back to 0.5 as it was a default. And when I move values in boxes like this, I typically move at first to move large jumps. I'll double and I'll have numbers. So it was 0.5, so I put 0.25. And from 0.25 I might jump down to like 0.1 to see what happens. You can see I'm getting some contrast up front, but I'm losing some of this in here. It's kind of hard to tell. I might want to put these lights back up against that back wall to see what happens. But you get the idea that using your exposure and tone mapping in post-process and using the correct light powers, all of this is really important, which actually the color is driven by SketchUp. So we said we would try that. Let's change this color to be just for fun, I want to try and make it red just to see what happens, or blue. Oh, we'll leave it red for now. Okay, let's see. It should throw now a red light, but using the IES profile. And there you go. So it's definitely throwing it in red. We can change it to any color we want. Another question you might have is about emitters. Can you use an emitter of a texture? And the best way to emit a texture, well, we could do it with this one back here. Just hit template, emitter, low voltage, and you're done. I use that for computer screens. I use it for LED wall panels, that sort of thing. It's very simple to do. And again, it's going to be really important how you're tone mapping and the other lighting in the scene. Delete those and hit render on this now. So only the back wall is going to be our light. And here you can see that panel is emitting light. And we are at 1:1 exposure. So if I double the exposure like we did in the past, you can see that that really brightens things up. We'll go back to simple just to show you that. Simple mapping versus filmic. Watch the details come back in that artwork with filmic, and the colors are just more powerful and the contrast is better. So I really like this filmic. What if you wanted to light something like a PNG file, like a fireplace? I'm going to choose this template. I'm going to turn that light off. So I'm going to go back to template, flat, flat, to get it back to its basic SketchUp. Now I'm going to import, let's make a little fireplace. I imported the image. There we go. I'm going to take the paint from the wall. I'm going to paint these surfaces because you don't want any pure white surfaces in the scene. And then we choose template, emitter. Yeah, we could try a little voltage, but in this case, since it's fire, let's set it to 300. Let's just try that. And we will see what happens. Okay. But you'll notice the rocks, of course, are glowing. So what you want to do is very carefully make your PNG file so that it's really clean and no excess. Let's try a different image. Here I have some flames. Here this is kind of sloppy. You can see it's not quite cleaned up, and then here's flames transparent. I've done a little better job of cleaning that up. So I'm going to import that. There we go. And explode it. Can't edit it as if it's left in it as an image. Template, emitter, low voltage, and then set it to 300, which is what we set last time. Okay, very nice. And now what you might have to do in order to get the transparency to work, convert it to deep. Make sure the clipping here is set to 0.5. Let's try and render that. Okay. So you might have to work with the clipping to find the range that you need for your particular image. It's going to be different for each image. Maybe you have an LED strip that's just shining down or just shining up, and it's very thin. So go here, choose my LED emitter panels, turn it back to white again. And since it's a very thin strip, I'm going to choose again, templates, emitter low voltage. But we know that we want that strip to be fairly bright, and I'm guessing with that surface area right now, it's probably only emitting, if it's 50 watts per meter, you're looking at probably 20 watts maybe. But we could try and run it. Let's try and just run it and see what happens. First I want to go make sure that we're on simple with exposure 2, so that we're comparing apples to apples here. Okay, so that's actually pretty much what you would expect from a LED strip, right? And we'll try rendering again. And there's your LED strip surrounding that piece of artwork. Okay. We could even go boost the exposure. There we go. So it's a constant balance between the power of your lights in the scene and the exposure and other tone mapping settings you're using. So as you get more used to that, it'll become easier, but I understand that that's a little complicated when you're first starting out. So again, be careful not to make changes in here that are too drastic that you get lost. And always, when in doubt, go back to exposure 1, gamma 1, simple, and start from there again. The only other thing I can think of is if you are doing a sign. So let's put a sign on this back wall. Okay. So we've placed this text, but it's touching the wall. And what we want is a backlit sign on that wall. So we're going to move that text out 5 centimeters. Let's make it 2.5 centimeters, an inch away from the wall. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go in front. No, we're going to go in the side view. Turn off perspective, and now I have, whoops, side perspective. I'm going to need to grab the back surfaces. Here's the back surfaces, and if we're in monochrome mode, we could see if I were to reverse that face, and we're going to paint that with the LED. Oops, I got to be in that mode here. So I have the back of the signage painted with the emitter material. Okay. Actually, let's make it like an orange. Okay. And we will go back to our emitter material here, LED emitter panels. And we'll go to templates. I think you know the drill by now, low voltage 50. And again, the amount of wattage I want the back of that sign to be lit up with, I'm guessing it's going to be around 500 watts. It might be even more. Well, we'll start at 500 watts. Okay. And let's hit render. I've got no other lights in this scene. And again, the background is set to background color black. No sun enabled. The only light is the signage. And actually, before I do that, I want to go in and I want to give that signage a material. I'm going to make it There we go. So the back of the sign, again, is still painted that glowing, but the front of the sign and the sides is all that stainless. So let's see what we got here. If you have Twilight Pro, it automatically loads this material for you, which it did for me. And let's render. And there you go. You can see that the back of the signage is perfectly lit. It gives that nice glow all around it and everything. Maybe it's too bright, maybe it's not. It depends on what other lights that we have in this scene. If I were to choose from Twilight Lighting Components and go to let's try track lights here. Let's look down on the top, turn off perspective. Okay, so we've got these track lights shining on the wall on the sides, maybe in this display. And now we can see how much the other lights are affecting the space and the type of exposure that we're getting. Maybe we set this to 3. Maybe we use highlight compression to kill some of these a little bit. Okay. And let's try a different angle. So we hit stop on that. I'm going to pause and fast forward this a little bit. Now that we have so many lights in the scene, and when you use the light emitting surfaces and the engine divides each surface up into triangles, that's how many lights you have. So this the back of this light fixture now probably has something like 300 lights plus all the track lights, so it's going to take a little bit longer to calculate than just a simple flat one single rectangle surface. But here it is. It's looking quite good now. I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to change this to be color. Okay, so I've loaded a scratch texture into this material and set the bump texture also. We'll hit render on that. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit so you can see the results. And here's what it looks like after a minute and a half. It's looking nice and clean. You get a very good idea of how the light emitters are working in Twilight Render. I hope that demystifies the light emitters a little bit for you. And again, if you have any questions, this has been Fletch with Twilight Render support, and I will see you on the forums.